Hey there everybody, welcome back to my channel. This video is really just going to be about my overall opinion on the Nikon Z7 II. I'm going to try and get right to the point. I don't want to blab on about camera specs. That's all over the internet. You can find it all. I think the most important thing for people to find out about this camera is how well does it work for autofocusing, fast moving objects, video, that kind of stuff. Because a lot of people kind of give it a little bit of grief because it doesn't have the most high-end autofocus system, so I assume it's not going to be as good or usable as others. And I haven't used it yet for that. I'm filming on it right now, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be perfectly fine. And I'm moving up from a F-mount D500, so I have a pretty good grasp on what autofocus and tracking should be like from a DSLR standpoint. So it's going to be fun to compare how that worked to how this is going to work. But I also spent about 45 days trying to find this camera, and all the big box stores like B&H and Adorama didn't have it in stock. I had to order in for B&H, and it took a month and a half, and they never sent one to me. They didn't know where it was at or when they were going to get them in. So I eventually canceled my order to them, got my refund, and then I went to Boardman, Ohio, to my local camera store, and I called them up, and within a day of talking to them, I have a brand new Z7 II with 2470 f4 kit, and they had the FTZ in stock as well, and I already had the EN-EL15C battery from a previous order. YM camera was great to me, answered any question I had on the phone, really understanding about everything, and it was in and out the door within 5-10 minutes once you get there, so really appreciate them for helping me out with this. But for the rest of the video, I'm just going to try and put some clips and photos and video and stuff in there just to show how well the camera works, what I see, and I will be shooting most of it on the Sigma 150-600 Contemporary that you've seen in some of my other videos. I already have the FTZ on there, so we'll see how it works. I'm beyond excited to see how this is. It's going to be a good time. I'm excited for this video, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, everybody, we're here at Porter's Cove at Moraine. Got the Z7 II. Manual. We're going to be using, what do they call it? Autofocus Continuous Wide Large. We're going to try some birds in flight to see how the autofocus works. Wide Large. It's really hard to pin down the ducks when they're on the water, so I'm almost eye level with the water. And haven't quite got the dexterity down to switch between single point and wide. Because on the cameras, on the DSLRs, you can use your function buttons to program single point. So as soon as you press it, you instantly go to single point. But on this, I programmed my AF selection to hold record button as if it was a shift key. And then you use the front wheel to cycle through them. 6 to 8 inch waves on the water right now. Making it difficult. And the negative of this right now is the wind's coming at me, so the ducks are taking off and going that direction. Generally, this is the same area that I was shooting video of those tundra swans a week ago. And this whole section of the lake was covered in ice. It's been in the 50s, give or take, for the past week. And all the ice is gone. No more tundra swans that I can see. I'm going to see if I can't use the tracking feature in the auto mode. I have that programmed to the function button up front. Yeah, the tracking function is too big of a box to get a good bead on the ducks' heads as they bob through the water. It keeps wanting to lock onto the parts of the water around them, not really on them, even at 600 millimeters and 80 to 100 feet away. is a small target though, so I can understand. We're going to switch to dynamic autofocus, and we'll see how that works. Now I am using VR and IBIS off on this. I feel like sometimes IBIS and the VR, at least in this Sigma lens, doesn't really talk to each other very well, but I'll turn it on and we'll see how that works for the rest of the day here. Now for the 3 seconds that I've used VR and IBIS on in the kayak, this is the first time, I have noticed it absolutely helped keep the EVF stable, and it made it easier to keep my autofocus point in dynamic on the Canada Goose on the right here. So we'll see how it works with birds in flight. Just to cover what I said in this, because the plane was flying over and you couldn't hear what I was saying, I put my camera down and it goes into hibernation, and if you go to pick it back up, you have to press the shutter button down halfway as you pick it up to bring it up to your eye to shoot. By the time it gets to your eye, it'll be ready to go. It's not that slow, it's just a different setup that I have to do in my mind. With the DSLRs, you could turn them off and turn them back on, and then by the time you get them to your eye, it'd be ready to go, and you didn't have to wake it out of hibernation. And I forgot to mention earlier, I am shooting in continuous high. Supposedly, that only gives you autofocus in single point. I'm kind of hoping that's not completely true. Kind of seems like it defeats the purpose of trying to shoot 10 frames per second if it can't track a subject. I just wanted to add an extra thought to this portion of the clip about continuous high versus continuous high plus. I did notice more keepers with continuous high versus high plus with moving subjects, with wide large and wide small. Now I did not try single point, as it was too hard to keep a single point AF on the moving subjects for the birds in flight. One thing to remember if you're shooting the Z7ii with continuous plus to get to 10 frames per second is it does do the slideshow effect preview in the viewfinder. I'm not entirely sold that that's a really bad thing yet, because you can still relatively track things if you're used to tracking things with a DSLR, when in reality, whenever you're shooting with a DSLR, you have the blackout. And whenever you shoot continuous, you still have the blackout on the Z7ii. Whenever you shoot continuous high, you have a little bit of a stutter slideshow effect, which to me, when I go to track something, even those ducks that took off, I didn't really notice anything to like keep an autofocus point on target. So I mean, like, your mileage may vary with that, but that's just what I found out so far from my personal experience. So I just want to take a few seconds and go over parts of the camera body itself, what I do and do not like. Now, if you have to use the FTZ'd adapter, it does come with a tripod screw, but I'm not a big fan of this because you can't move this big chunky bit out of the way. You can't rotate it either. Now, onto the camera itself, you have two FN buttons right here you can program for almost anything. As I mentioned earlier, FN1 is for my tracking. Not a big fan of it so far, but I'm going to try it in video later and we'll see how that works. Then you have your record button, ISO, exposure compensation button here. You have a wheel in the front, wheel in the back. You have a wheel here for manual, aperture, shutter, professional P, auto, and whatnot, but you gotta press this middle button to change it so you don't accidentally change it. And then on the side, you have your microphone, headphone, release, HDMI, and USB. And what I like about these covers is it has a nice snap to it. I don't know if you can hear that. Then if you take it off, that sounds like a good snap too. And you have little channels in here that are recessed so you don't get any moisture in any of your ports. So far, I think they're better covers than on my D500. They clip in place and give you a better feel for it, I guess. Then on the right side, you have your SD cover, CFE, XQD, or SD. I have, both of them filled right now. What I don't like about this that I've seen other people kind of complain on is, like, you'll be sitting here shooting, and if you accidentally pull your hand back, it's got a little bit of a knurl to it, a little grip. The grip is comfortable, don't get me wrong, but if you pull back on it, it opens it up accidentally. So I kind of wish there was like a little slide or something you had to move to open this door, instead of just doing it real easy. That's really my only complaint for the covers. Then on the back side, you have your I button, your D-pad, your joystick for your autofocus points, a switch for video and photo. Then you hit the display button and you can change what's on the screen. So right now, in photo mode, we have our digital level. It'll show you what your exposure settings currently is, how many shots you got left. And then you can cycle through the different screens with your histogram and whatnot on there. Your menu button and your continuous shooting button. But one thing I do wish it had, I wish it had a selector on top so you could automatically use that to select your burst speed if you want single, 5 frames, 10 frames, whatnot. I would prefer that over using this button down here. But other than that, it's not. I like the ergonomics of it. I just wish it was a little bit longer so my pinky didn't fall off of it. So eventually I might get a grip or maybe a little add-on on the bottom for something with a little extra support. And then another thing, which some people might gasp, I'm doing this in the middle of the lake, but when you go to take your lens off, your sensor's exposed, the shutter doesn't actually close to cover it. I do wish that the shutter would close. I feel like that's something they might be able to do in the firmware, but that's just like a peace of mind kind of thing. But it doesn't really affect the use of the camera, to be honest. One thing I forgot to add is there's no button illumination on here. So if you can see, it's just on or off. No button illumination option. I do kind of wish that was on there for this class of body, for this price point at least, but it's not. I'll live with it. It's not end of the world, but it'd be a nice feature to have. Then also, the screen comes out, tilts up and down. Doesn't tilt to the side, doesn't tilt up, so you can't really use this screen for vlogging and whatnot, but that doesn't really bother me any. I don't really do any of that. But yeah, that's about it. If you have any questions about the ergonomics, the layout, the handling, drop a comment down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Just want to take a second here at this scene to say that with the 70-200 Nikon VR2 adapted with the FTZ, I got a much higher keeper rate of shots, even when tracking moving objects like these geese right here. But the Sigma 150-600 I feel really struggled a lot more than it did on a DSLR, but I think that has more to do with third-party glass being adapted to these Z bodies, and if you had a Nikon 200-500 5.6 adapted, you would probably not have to worry about any of these issues whatsoever. But as you can see in this video, I did get some pretty good shots even using the third-party glass. So hopefully sooner than later Nikon comes out with our 200-600 Z mount lens so I can replace my Sigma and get much better performance out of the camera. And last but not least, for the photo section of this overview, we have a couple shots of a muskrat here, and I'm not entirely sure what happened to him. I just thought it was rather interesting that part of his face looks like it was injured or something. Some people have suggested that maybe he was attacked by an eagle or a mink, maybe fighting for a mating partner or a hunter's trap. Just something kind of odd to see out there. As we begin the video portion of the overview for the camera for my first month of ownership, I just want to take a moment and say this clip right here was shot in Cranberry Township, and it was shot on the 24-70 f4Z lens that came in the kit. And I have no qualms with it. It's very sharp. The focus is perfectly quiet. You can hear a pin drop when it's focusing for photo or video, which is not the same that can be said for the adapted FTZ Nikon or third-party glass. On a third-party glass, you can definitely pick up the sounds of the autofocus motors, which might be what you don't want. So if you have an off-camera microphone, the adapted FTZ glass works great for video, and you will not have the sound of the autofocus motor. This was shot right here with autofocus on, tracking the plane on my 70-200. This was autofocus on the Sigma 150-600 Contemporary. This clip was shot with focus peaking and manual focus only. I personally feel I get much better focusing using focus peaking on the screen or the EVF versus autofocus. That could just be a bias in my view though. And I feel you get better focus pulls, and it's a little more gentle and easier on the eyes and not as jerky when you use manual focus as well. This clip with the red-winged blackbird was shot with autofocus on, using auto area with the tracking feature. This was also shot on autofocus with the tracking feature and auto area. That is a tree creeper, a brown tree creeper. Now that we're on to the slow motion clips, trying it out the 1080-120 slow motion. This is just a little garden decoration outside. But I just wanted to show how slow 120 looks. Here we have a red-bellied woodpecker. They like to take the peanuts out of the peanut feeder and wedge it into the tree bark to pick at the peanuts to chip it apart for easier for them to eat that way. And you can see his little tongue coming out whenever he swallows. This is just after that scene, whenever he was trying to steal some more peanuts. Now I am upscaling this to 4K when I export and resolve and upload to YouTube. Some Canada geese taking over a muskrat den. Now we have some in-flight mallards here, a male and female. Now the focus is a little off because I'm still learning manual focusing, but eventually I'll get better at that. We have a seagull in flight here. We had some pretty bright daylight today with zero cloud cover, so my exposure was pretty bad for most of the day. But if you see any misfocus, that's more on me and not the camera, since all these scenes with the wildlife was shot in manual focus only. Now about the camera's buffer capacity. When you shoot in continuous high, which is 5.5 frames per second with full tracking, you can get about 214-bit frames in a row, which is artificially limited by the camera. If you shoot continuous high at 10 frames per second, you get about 55 12-bit frames or about 40 14-bit frames at an estimated 8 to 9 frames per second. I'm not sure if I fully believe the 10 frames per second myself. But the buffer clears in both situations in roughly 5 to 8 seconds. Shooting bursts of 5 to 15 frames in either option will net you an unlimited buffer depth regardless of 12 or 14-bit and high versus high plus. And here we just have a clip of 5.5 frames per second in continuous high, and I've honestly never hit a full buffer in high or high plus with the camera, and as mentioned, it clears very nicely. In these instances, I'm using a Sony 64GB XQD G series card. Now we'll talk about Snapbridge as an app. Over the past few years, it's gotten a lot more useful, and it's pretty easy to connect your camera with it nowadays using Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on the Z7 II. You can transfer photos and movies JPEG or RAW now over the app, which is pretty cool. That way you can look at your RAWs on your phone or tablet to do some quick editing. When you go to import all your RAW files, you're limited to 100 files, which is okay. I thought it was kind of low at the time whenever I was trying this out, but it turns out that
It's not a bad thing because it takes forever to get your photos transferred from the camera to your phone or device. So in my testing for raw file downloads from Snapbridge to my phone, I was using a Samsung S20 FE, and I tried it with 100 RAWs, and I only made it about 25 RAWs through because it took so long. On average, I was averaging 2 to 3 files per minute. Now these are Z7ii files, so they are 40 to 50 megabytes per frame. But after 5 minutes, I was able to only transfer about 10 raw files. This took about 2% of my Samsung's battery and 5% of the EL15C battery in the camera. My second test was 27 RAWs, and that took 13 minutes for that to transfer over. So if you were going to do 100 RAWs, it'd probably take almost an hour to transfer it all over and kill both your batteries pretty quickly. So unless you're doing quick transfers of JPEGs, I probably wouldn't recommend doing this, but using the app to transfer GPS data to the camera to mark it in Lightroom was pretty cool and handy. But me personally, I really wish the camera at this price range had built-in GPS. So you didn't have to worry about that, because certain places you go might not have cell reception to help with the triangulation of your position for the camera. So you end up draining your phone battery faster anyways. As mentioned earlier in the review while paddling, I was out for about 2 hours, 3 hours, and I took about 600 photos, and I used about 30% of my battery, give or take, for that. Now, people say the GPS could drain it faster if it was built in, but, I mean, if you can get 1,500 to 2,000 shots on a battery in a DSLR, my personal opinion is I would suffer a few hundred losses of battery. Another cool little thing on the Z7 II, which is in the other Z cameras, is focus shifting for macro, which, I mean, you could use it for anything else, but it's mostly designed for macro. So you can tell the camera to take a certain amount of photos with a certain amount of focus change, and then later in Lightroom and Photoshop, you can combine them as layers and then flatten them out to make one image. Now here, this is an example of one of the flowers in our garden. I took about 9 photos using focus shift shooting. I did this free-handed actually. I didn't use a tripod or anything, and it turned out pretty good, mostly probably because of the IBIS and VR in the lens. As this was shot on a Sigma 105 f-mount EX lens. It's about $500 new, and you can find it used for about $300 to $400, and it is honestly one of the best bang for buck lenses you can get. Now, when I did all this, it probably took about 6 to 8 minutes to flatten everything, save it, and export it back to Lightroom. When you're about ready to save the file to your catalog, it will probably tell you it's over 4 gigabytes, the final image, and you'll have to save it as a PSD file. And that's just a Photoshop file that retains all of your information as if it was a RAW file. And now, as you can see with the final image of the 9 stacked, everything is in nice sharp focus all the way down. Flower looks amazing. If you would have took a single photo, you'd have some blurry sections that wouldn't all be in perfect focus. But with the stacked final, everything is mint and exactly how you want it to be. And of course, it's saved as a PSB file, so you still retain all of your editing ability as if it was a RAW. So for macro shooters on still subjects, the focus shifting built into the Z camera is amazing. Like, I can't get over how cool it is. I know it's been in some of the other competitor cameras. This is one of the first times it's been on a Nikon camera, I believe. But it's almost mind-blowing to me, to be honest. To be able to stack as many images as you want at 46 megapixels gives you some pretty crazy details going on. Just some bonus photography out of the camera for examples of how sharp and ridiculous these megapixels can be. So most of these are over the past week or two. And here we have a dark-eyed junco, I believe, and this is the full resolution of the image, But you can also just zoom in and you can see all the details of his feathers and everything. This isn't edited. This is at 200 ISO. But the amount of latitude retained in these files is kind of ridiculous. It's just crazy how much information the sensor can retain in the highlights and shadows and fix everything up. Because in wildlife, you have to just admit to yourself that you're never going to get the perfect exposure on certain subjects because the light and the angle of everything changes so much. It's not like you can just tell your subject to please stand at a certain angle. It just doesn't work like that. And then next, we have another Junko. I'm probably saying that wrong. But if you look at 100%, this is at 600 millimeters, f7.1, ISO 200. See all the detail on his feathers and stuff. And you have to remember, this is a third-party Sigma lens, the Contemporary, and it's not known for really flaunting a lot of sharpness at 600. So this is kind of like a crazy thing to see, to be quite honest. And you can actually just see his iris in there and the color of the iris and whatnot. That's just amazing. This was shown earlier in the video, but I just want to take a moment to show you more detail of it. Now, one thing to remember is you see all those like waves in the background and over top of the swans. That's mostly from heat coming off the ice, because it was a pretty warm 40-degree day and the sun was hitting the ice and you had all these heat currents coming off of it, causing all this wave and distortion in your image quality. So it's definitely not the lens and it's definitely not the camera. But up close, the closer swans, you can tell, are nice and sharp and have good detail. And plus all the broken ice through here. They actually kept going around and like breaking the ice with their beaks so they can find spots to like lay in, but they didn't want to lay in the open water that was like knotted by the ice. It was kind of strange. This crocus was in our garden, one of the first flowers that comes up in the springtime. This was actually shot on a Canon FD 135. It was adapted with an FD to Z adapter off Amazon. I'll probably put a link for that in the description. It was like 16 bucks. It doesn't have any electrical contacts or anything. It's all manual focus with focus peaking, but it worked pretty good. I'm pretty thrilled with the detail and just the texture and quality of this. And then here we have an adolescent bald eagle. This was shot up near Conneaut Lake, and you can see how nice and sharp this is. But if you go and look at the actual image, how much I had to crop in just to get it. This is the full view, but if you look at 100%, it's a little noisy, a little off, but a little bit of editing, and you get this out of it, which I honestly can't wait to get an actual Z mount 200 to 600, as said previously a few times. But out of a third-party cheap glass, I'm pretty excited about this. Just another quick example from the same day. This one isn't edited really. This is just how it came out of the camera. And it's just the detail on all the feathers and whatnot is crazy. Here we have some golden eyes and redheads swimming along. This is a Geneva swamp. And this, you might think this is the full image. It is definitely not. This is actually the full image. And everything looks good all the way across the frame. I have no buyer's remorse for this camera, to be quite honest with you. Then we have some ringnecks in flight. Looks like they're kind of chasing a female. And this is also shot at 600 ISO 500, 1/2000th of a second. And the original image is about looking like this. But everything looks nice and sharp for the lens and for focusing on the birds with all this busy background and whatnot. And then my last image quality, really, to show off here. This was on my 70-200 VR2 adapted with the FTZ. Now that lens, as said earlier, it nails every single time. It's like it drives nails. It's crazy. But just the image quality coming out of that is pretty great. And then this is, of course, the original shot from the kayak. So in closing of my 1 month overview experience with the Nikon Z7 II, for wildlife, I would have to say it's great on Nikon F-mount FTZ glass, but third-party glass tends to struggle with consistency on moving subjects. I think that's mostly due to third-party glass and has nothing to do with the camera or the FTZ adapter. The video quality is amazing. The slow motion is great. IAF is fantastic for portraits and people. I never really used it on pets or wildlife though. It's not as dependable as other brands are. Build quality feels rugged. It does feel like an upgrade in build quality compared to my D500. The Z glass is extremely quiet and accurate. You can't even hear it focusing or tracking you as you can with adapted glass on the FTZ. So if you want to do adapted glass, your best bet is to use a lav mic or an off-camera mic so it doesn't pick up the chatter of the focus motors. No issue with the buffer whatsoever. Clears very quickly, never run out of buffer. The grip could be slightly longer for larger hands as myself, but the grip could fix this if you want to spend $300-400 on it, or get one of those tiny little aftermarket pinky grips. That might help as well. I do wish it had button illumination, and I wish it had more dials so I could rely less on the I menu. And as previously stated, I wish it had a GPS built in. But other than those little bullet points, I would have to say I'm extremely pleased with my camera purchase. I have no regrets going forward, and I don't really see why this couldn't be my camera to use for the next 3 to 6 years easily. And I don't see why anyone else wouldn't want to try it out and use it. If you are interested in buying it, but you don't really want to put the money up front right away, you could always rent the camera from a rental service and give it a go and see what you think of it. But I think you'll be highly pleased for wildlife. Plus the extra resolution for the 46 megapixel sensor and being full frame and having great low light for its sensor size, with amazing dynamic range at base ISO 64. Landscapes and cropping in for photos is amazing. I doubt you'll even be disappointed. The sensor is technically 3 years old. It is very similar to the D850, but it's such a solid sensor, I don't think anyone would have any qualms with using it for basically any type of photography. If you have any questions or concerns, please leave a comment down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I could. And if you loved this video as much as I enjoyed making it, please subscribe to my channel, click like, and happy shooting.